Alright, so now on to the next equation, when we're talking about calling 3-bet shoves. And this is a position where you're, 25 big blinds or and deeper, usually. And let's just start off with an example, and then we'll move on from there. So let's say we are at 5100, and you have 1200 chips in front of you. So that means effective stacks are, yes, 12 big blinds effective stacks correctly. So you decide to min raise and villain shoves all in. So how exactly do you figure this out? This is a spot where a lot of people struggle with, where they're like, oh, well, I have this hand and I don't really know if I should call, but I really don't know how to figure it out. Well, this is how you figure it out. So fairly simple at first. Let's whip up the calculator here. We're going to start off with the equation, and remember, we start off with 12 big blind deeps, but since we min raised, we're sacrificing some blinds, so if we fold, we lose those. So we kind of have to add that in the equation, so we do 10 instead of 12 because we lose 2 big blinds when min raising. Secondly, we divide it by 24. Why 24? Because we have to divide by the maximum amount that we can win, and if we start off with 12 big blinds, the most we can win is 24 big blinds, which is why we divide by 24. And then we do that, and just to make it a little bit easier on the eyes, you times it by 100, and you need about 42% equity to make a good call here. And now this is where isomizer comes into play. Alright guys, so jump right into isomizer here, and let's just set up everything accordingly. We got chip EV, 5100, same example with the 1200 and 1800, 12 big blind effective stacks. What we want to do is we want to raise, switch these around real fast, have the small blind raise, have the villain go all in. What you want to do is you kind of want to figure out, using isomizer, his ranges here. So what exactly is he shoving with? With this guy, we're gonna make sure he's a pretty tight shover. He isn't really gonna be shoving too many with too many 3-bet bluffs. So a pretty standard guy. So let's say about 25%, right? So yeah, 25% here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring up this software as well, which mine's not Poker Stove, but I would use Poker Stove. I just was having some issues with it, so I decided to whip this one up instead. So we said that our villain shoves 25%, so you gotta go to ranges, go to 25%, save, and the example we used in well, I mentioned King 9, so let's just say King 9 because King 9 offsuit is one of those hands versus like a very tight opponent where you're just kind of on the fence and you're like, I don't know if I can call this or not. So it kind of works well for this example. So King 9 here, let's save, and remember our equity was, let's do it once again, it was 10 divided by 24 equals 41 times 100. So we need at least 41% equity, more like 42% equity, to make this a justified call versus opponent's range. Now we got his range, and we calculate equity, and we have 38.23%, which means that it's a fold. Let's see if let's see King Jack. See if King Jack works. Say with King Jack in this position versus that range, it is a call, 43%. So you can mess around with this a lot, just so when it's in game, because obviously you don't have time to go run into freaking isomizer and figure it out. You have 25 seconds to make a decision. So you do the equation, you figure out where you are, and you know if it's a call or a fold. Pretty simple, right? So that's pretty fun stuff. Next thing you want to be looking at with isomizer is being able to open shove, knowing what you can versus what ranges. Alright, so what you want to do with isomizer right here, just have yourself in a small blind, have him go all in. You want to figure out his calling ranges this deep. Let's say that he's got a pretty wide calling range, to say all pocket pair, Ace X, a lot of the middle stuff, and you know, King 5 suited, King 9 offsuit. That's about reasonable there. So about 28% range, plug it in right there. You just press calculate, and there you go. These are all the hands that you could profitably shove against a guy with that kind of calling range this deep. So 12 big blinds deep. So there you go. A lot of Ace X, which is standard. A lot of middle stuff, and then like stuff like 9-8 suited, 10-8 suited, 10-9 suited. The one thing you want to think about though, when you're doing this, I mean, Icy Miser is good to tell you what you can shove, but sometimes it's not the best play. For example, let's say you're playing against a guy 12 big blinds deep who doesn't fold to your min raise. He just flats you all day long. So when you have a hand like Ace 2 offsuit, it's probably better to shove it because you get more fold equity that way. And if you min raise and he calls, Ace 2 plays very bad post flop. So chances are you're not going to hit the flop, and you're going to be in a pretty tough situation where you could have just did the more optimal play and just shoved all in. Another thing versus a guy who just like folds too much out of position, you can think about limping ace. You can think about limping kings and queens and aces. That's probably the best play versus somebody who just folds too much out of position. Another thing you can do against somebody who really folds a lot out of position is you can just min raise, fold a lot of junk, and you know, feel confident about it. And last but not least, let's say you're playing somebody who just 3-bet you all day long, all in. If you have a hand like Ace 8 suited, you know, you min raise and calling off is probably a really good play because you're probably going to get it in ahead. And also, if you shove in pre-flop, you might just have fold some junk hands. So you always want to think about the best play possible versus what kind of opponent you're playing against. And overall, once you start thinking like that, you become a better player overall. And that's kind of the key here. The other thing we can do with Icy Miser is 3-bet bluffing as well. With 3-bet range, I'm sorry, 3-bet shoving ranges. I'm sorry. So let's say we got to put the hero in the big blind here. Same stack sizes. I mean, you can mess around with this with your own time. But just giving you like similar examples. So let's say he raises to 200, and let's give him a decent range about in this stack depth. So that's about 60% is fine. So we got an opponent who's raising us 60% of the time on the small blind. And then we got to figure out his calling ranges. So let's say he's pretty tight. He's calling off with let's say Ace 6 offsuit. Let's say he's calling off with Ace 4, Ace 5 suited, Ace 6 suited. Some of the middle stuff. Like 10-9 suited, Jack 9 suited. Yeah, that stuff works about well. So about 22%. So this will tell us how many hands we could 3-bet shove with for equity. And look at that. Every hand we can shove, every hand that we look at here, we can shove for a profit. So it's great. So it becomes a situation where what's more optimal? I mean, do you really want to shove all in with a 3-2 suited, even though it is a decent play? It's a plus EV play, yes, but you also want to take into consideration game flow, your opponent's tendencies and stuff like that. Let's do a little one more example here. Let's say he's only raising 30%, right? 32%. Same calling range, and now look, these are the hands that we could shove with and feel good about, basically, and it gets a lot tighter. So this kind of proves to you that, you know, when he's tightening up his ranges, you got to be careful. Like, you can play against somebody who's raising, you know, 90% when the blinds are big, and then when it gets short stacked, he tightens up to 30%. And these are things you always want to keep an eye on. And just play around with these kinds of software and understand, you know, the scenarios that come with playing cards, and just try to play your best. And that's what this software is for. Alright, so math slide number 3. So, have you ever heard of when somebody said, well, I have to be right 33% of the time on the river, and you're like, oh my god, how does he know that? Like, what is he doing that makes him understand that he only needs to be 33% of the time right? Well, it's fairly simple. And once again, we'll start off with another example, and then we'll just break it all down once again. So let's say the blinds are 15, 30, and villain makes a min raise. Min raises pre-flop, and we flat. So right off the bat, let's just do the easy math there. He raises to 60, we call, which makes the pot 120. And I'm breaking this down for you guys, so I mean, it might just sound like really stupid, but when I break it down to a whole, it allows you to understand everything, and it sinks in a little bit more than just doing it so fast. So if you don't like me breaking down everything here, I'm sorry about that. But you know, it goes a long way with a lot of players. So I like to just, you know, break it down completely and then, you know, sum it up. So so let's move on. So total pot is 120 here. So let's say you know, same hand, he does a standard C bet for 60, half pot, we flat call, which once again makes the pot 240. Now it gets a little bit interesting. Turn comes, B barrels 170 into 240, and we flat call once again. So that's 340 plus 240, which makes it 580 total pot. And river, he decides to barrel the river again, makes it 300. And if we decide to call, it would make the total pot 1180. And this is where the equation comes in. Let's bring up the calculator once again. So let's do an example. So the way you figure this out is you gotta understand the river bet. So obviously the river bet was 300. So you do 300 divided by, now it's the bet plus the call plus the pot. So before the river even came, the pot was 580. So if we do the bet, which was 300, and the call, which would be 300 as well, plus the pot. So if we do 580 plus 300 plus another 300, we will get 1180. So if we do 300 divided by 1180, boom, 25%. And there you go. You have to be right 25% of the time on the river versus this guy. Now, do you think you're right 25% of the time versus villain's range? And this is kind of where Flopzilla can come into.
Alright guys, so this is what Flopzilla looks like. You know, it's really good for putting somebody on a range. Something that you can do in your spare time, just kind of go over, you know, how much your opponent opens, in position, and then just play with a few different kind of boards, and just kind of get a feel about how often he hits the board and how often he doesn't hit the board, and just kind of get what it will do is help you get a better feel when you're actually in game, because when you're faced with certain decisions while playing, you can't just stop and jump on to Flopzilla and figure it out. That's why you got to study when you're not playing. So what I want to do here is just go over a few little examples, just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. So I've obviously right here is his opening range here. Obviously you could kind of, you know, figure out your own ranges as well, but let's just do it as if we're playing against a villain here. So let's say we're playing a reg, likes to open around 85% of the time, which is fine, and let's just give him a dry flop here. So king 6 3 rainbow. So first of all, check out his pre-flop opening ranges. There's a ton of junk in there. So you know, when you're playing against somebody who is opening so wide, you have to understand that he has a ton of hands that aren't going to hit the board all that well. So our example here is with a pretty dry flop, and let's see how often he, you know, misses the board. And in this case, versus a villain who's opening 85% of the time, he's got 47% of this 47% of the time he has absolutely nothing. And that's why a lot of players say that this is a very good board to check raise, because it is. A lot of the time he will have nothing and just fold when we do check raise to him on this kind of board. Another thing you can think of is, like, just look at how often he will hit top pair, so 12%. weak pair 8%, mid pair 11%. So all these things are very vital when you talk about somebody's ranges. Now let's check about somebody who opens a little bit less. Let's say like 50% here. So as you can see, the range chart looks a lot different. Not as much junk, right? So now he only has air in his range 38% of the time on such a dry board. So these are all things that you can like just literally play with when you're when you're not playing and when you're doing your study session. And one thing you could also think about doing is just like, let's say you're playing somebody who's raising 85% early in the match, and then obviously when we get to 25 big blinds deep or lower, he jumps right down to 40%. So you can play with those ranges as well and just figure out what he's doing, what he's opening with, and what kind of boards can we play back against, and what kind of boards we should not really contest all that often. And these will not only help with putting him on a range, but it will help you make those very tough calls on the river when you have to be right 25% of the time. All this will make you a better poker player overall, and once again, this is something that you should definitely use to make your game just a little bit better.